Today is a Sunday of new. We started a new year. We've already heard about new things people are doing. We have a new nursery. I want to encourage you to go look at it after all the kids have been claimed. Don't just walk in there and create a mess and chaos. But you can go look at the design that Ariel came up with. So we've got a new nursery. We start a whole new set of sermons this year with a new theme. Last year we looked at the book of Romans. And through our study we saw what it means to be called a real disciple of Christ. Which was, a disciple is not one who just accepts the teachings, but also helps share those teachings with other people to spread them. So taking that knowledge and that theme and where the church had been growing and how God had been blessing the church, the elders and I looked trying to figure out where God wanted us to go, where he was pointing and prompting us. And while talking about the church growth for 2019, not just in numbers, but also in our knowledge, a basic idea started forming through the elders there. We all knew it is from God because we felt the same nudge, we felt the same peace about it. And so we expressed that new theme at the congregational meeting, and the new theme for 2019 is authentic. We want to be a church that is authentic. We don't want those fake, phony, or facades. To be a real disciple of Christ, like we learned last year, means you need to be an authentic Christian. They're synonymous. You can't have one without the other. So to help us learn, how are we going to learn to be more authentic Christian? I went and dove into the scriptures. And the obvious answer, and the elders even said it is, well, study Jesus. We need to see what Jesus says. He is an authentic Christian. He sets the standard. So we're going to look at Jesus. So where do you find about the life of Jesus? Well, those are recorded in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I know I'm a bit long-winded. I know that. I gave you a month off for December. We got him around 25 to 28 average minutes. It's a new year. That's over, just so you know. But even though I know I'm a bit long-winded, I know we cannot get through the four Gospels in 1 year. It took us 9 months just to get through the book of Romans. So I don't want to go through all the Gospels. So we had to break down which Gospel are we going to look at. So before we get there, I want you to look at something. This is Ezekiel, talks about some heavenly beings that are very weird looking. Ezekiel 1:10. Each had a human face in the front. The face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, the face of an eagle on the back. In the Old Testament, there's this idea, this weird creature of a lion, ox, man, and eagle. And it's very weird. I mean, what does this mean? What does this have to do with it? But we've learned if it's repeated, it's important. Look what it says all the way in the New Testament at the end in Revelation. In front of the throne was a shiny sea of glass, sparkling like crystal in the center. And around the throne were four living beings, each covered with eyes, front and back. The first of these living beings was like a lion. The second was like an ox. A third like a human face. And the fourth was like an eagle in flight. Do you see what's in there? It has to mean something. God doesn't just randomly throw things in there to make us puzzled. He puts them in there for a purpose. So what does this lion, ox, man, eagle have to do with anything? So we're in the beginning of looking at the life of Christ, which is found in the four Gospels. So which one do we choose? To do that, we need to break them down. Matthew's Gospel focuses on Christ the King of the Jews. Mark focuses on Christ the suffering servant. Luke focuses on Jesus' humanity, and John focuses on Christ, the Son of God. This is the basic one-sentence synopsis of the Gospels. And it's very simple. It's like, okay, we can understand that. But I want you to watch this. Okay, watch what happens. Matthew, Gospels focus on King of the Jews, the King, the Lion, the tribe of Judah. Mark focuses on Christ, the suffering servant, much like the ox pulling the load of all of humanity's sin and suffering. Luke focuses on Jesus' humanity being fully man, and John focuses on the deity like an eagle flying high over all of creation. Do you see how it's repeating? Even when I was in college, they gave us this idea and they started teaching us, look at the Gospels. They represent these four faces of God and four ways to see it. We got king, we got suffering servant, the ox, the lion, the ox, the man, the one we can relate to, and the deity, the creator. Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? I mean, I just saw some of you like, that's weird. It's kind of cool. When I first learned it in college, it really helped me to see the entire Bible is cohesive. It all fits together. It all points to God. It's not just some weird statement here and whatever that means. God brings it together so we can start understanding Him. All these verses support and complement the others. All of these are necessary traits of the Messiah. While I know Jesus is king, it is hard for me to relate to him because I am not royalty. If you were here a couple weeks ago, you heard who is royal. Okay, thanks, Bond. Okay. And Jesus being a servant, well, there are times we might felt like a servant with all the chores we had to do growing up. But teenagers, you don't know what it's like to be a real servant. Neither do I. And then the Son of God. How can any of us relate to the deity, the power, the high elevation of who Jesus really is? But Luke's gospel is different from the others in the sense that while he fully affirms that Jesus is divine, that he is the Messiah, he is the king, he is the servant, he is God, he is also completely man. Now that I can relate to. That I can understand. We know that Jesus is God-man, fully divine, human, fully human, being perfect and impeccable. And sometimes this overshadows our understanding of his humanity because we forget that the Bible says this in Hebrews 4. The high priest, meaning Jesus of ours, understands our weaknesses, for he faced the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. See, in his fully human form, he lived the authentic life so that we can follow his example. Luke's objective in writing was that we could see Jesus as if he were right next to us. He wants us to understand who Jesus is so we know who we claim. An authentic faith in Jesus leads to an authentic life lived for Jesus. A Christ who came to earth as a poor carpenter, never owned property, never wrote a book, never established a monument, but he, with his ragtag group of fishermen and social outcasts, turned the world upside down. That's the Christ we're going to study. That's the Christ we're going to come to know even more this year. So we're going to study the Gospel of Luke. It is the longest of the Gospels. Now, I didn't pick it because of that. And he's going to tell us right off the bat who he is, who wrote it, who he's writing to, and all of this. And so while I want you to go ahead and turn to Luke 1, and I want you to get in the habit, if it's in your tablet, your smart device, or a physical book, you need to make notes in these. You need to write on it so that the next time you turn and look there, you can be reminded of what God is teaching you through this. There are times in the scriptures where we're not sure who wrote the book. If you look at the book of Hebrews, there's a lot of debate who wrote it. There's a lot of debate, and we're not really sure, but we know who Luke is. And here's four things. While you turn to Luke, these scriptures are going to pop up. First, we know from Colossians 4:14, Luke, the beloved doctor, sends his greetings, and so does Demas. Luke is a physician. He is a doctor. He's a physician by trade. He's not a preacher or pastor. He's not necessarily a teacher. He's not an apostle. He's not an evangelist. He's a doctor. It's what he does. Secondly, we know that he's a physician. We know he also travels with the apostle Paul. That's who just wrote in Colossians. He travels all over the place with Paul. On numerous occasions, Paul lists who's with him and always calls him a fellow worker. Luke also wrote another book. This isn't going to be in there. It's called the book of Acts. Okay, the next part after John. And this letter of Luke is really a two-part letter to Theophilus. And so the book of Acts is usually called the Acts of the Apostles. It's how the apostles got the church going. Okay? Luke really could be the Acts of Jesus. So it's the Acts of Jesus which come out into the Acts of the Apostle, which show an authentic life because of Jesus. Little side note I just wanted to give you there. Also, we know something about Luke, and this might kind of trouble you or shock you. Luke started out as a skeptic. He was not one who just jumped in and believed. The reason we say Luke was a skeptic is it says he researched it to make sure it's true. He didn't just say, oh, you say that's true? Good enough for me. He was a skeptic. How do I know this? Look at Luke 1, verse 3. Having carefully investigated everything. He didn't just pick up one little volume and say, that's good enough. He carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I decided to write an accurate account for you. So he started out as a skeptic. He studied it. He searched it to find out it was true. And then he came out with an authentic faith. We know this because in 2 Timothy 4, the Apostle Paul is lamenting the fact that all these people have deserted him. Persecution began against the church, and to him, he's been beaten, he's been in prison, and almost everybody left him to go hide in Ephesus. They left except for Luke. Persecution started, and Luke stays to face it. And the only reason why he would do that is if he had an authentic faith. He felt the persecution, he saw the pain, and he says, I'm sticking through this. So Luke went from skeptic to believing passionately. If you watch the book, if you read the book or watched the movie, The Case for Christ, you'll see some similarities between Luke and Lee Strobel, who carefully studied to make sure they knew what it was, and both turned into be very passionate, authentic believers. So that's what we know about Luke. Now let's dive in and see. So chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I also decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Here's one of the reasons why I like Luke, how I love him. Look how he put this little letter together. He puts it very purposefully, intentionally. Many people have set out to write. There are lots of things out there about Jesus, he's saying. I know there's lots of them. I've read them. I studied them. And so I'm going to take all of those things and put them together in one volume so you can have an accurate account. He said that they used eyewitness accounts in these. This isn't hearsay. These are real-life people. Here's a little fact for you. The book of Luke was written around 60 A.D. We believe Jesus died between 33 and 36 A.D. So there's eyewitnesses who saw this when the book of Luke was written. He didn't just read things, he could go to eyewitness people. Have you ever seen people or talked to them? They're the ones who saw the accident. They're the eyewitnesses. They can give you a whole lot better account than their children who just tell you what their parents say because they can't answer the questions anymore. Only the eyewitnesses can. And so Luke purposely went up to them. It said, having carefully investigated everything. And we're looking at all that. The things that he learned from these eyewitnesses. Here's what we can get from Luke. He is not a blind faith kind of guy. That's another reason why we know he was a skeptic. He's not just Jesus is the Messiah, I'm jumping in. He had to carefully invest. How many people here have questioned, how do we know Jesus is the Son of God? How do we know what we have is authentic? How do we know the Bible is true? We need to ask these questions. There are some people who are just saying, hey, good enough, I'm in. And then there are some people who are like, I need some more foundation to stand on. Luke is your guy. He not only read it, he hunts down the people who said it. He goes and asks them the questions. When you saw Jesus go up into the sky, where were you standing? How did it look? Because he said something, I want to make sure what you say is exactly the same. He carefully investigated. He wants to hunt down whoever did it to make sure they're telling the truth. Paul's teachings to a group of men called the Bereans. Here's another reason why we know he's a skeptic at first and he's not a blind faith guy. Paul's teaching to a group of the Bereans, and they don't believe Paul in everything. When Paul's preaching and teaching them, everything he says, they go to the Old Testament to make sure it's real. They want to make sure it's authentic and correlates with everything they know about God. They keep going back and forth, and they were skeptics. And Luke says, you're my type of people. In his writings, he shows how they're honorable by saying, you didn't just blindly accept it. You checked it. Yes, I hit that. Rochelle's over there busting up because I hit the microphone. Everybody stop and look at Rochelle, so she's laughing. There we go. Okay. I was excited about this, and my hands are moving. I can't control it. There we go. So Luke says, you're my type of people. Let's get together. Let's talk about this. Let us discuss this, okay? It's evident that he didn't just trust things. He studied it. So you got a skeptic who compiled, who researched, who interviewed. And somewhere in the middle of all this, his heart became enlightened, and he became an impassionate follower of Jesus. And the reason I can, without a doubt, tell you he's an impassionate follower is because when people start getting killed for believing, he didn't run. He went from a skeptic who said, I'm not sure, to, you can kill me because I'm not moving. Luke goes to great lengths to stress the authenticity of his writing. He wants his readers to understand that this is only about Jesus. So first off, I know there's a lot of blanks. We're trying to get through this. I don't want to keep you here all day, but I didn't preach last week. So I've got to get 2 of them in today. I'm kidding. He's not in here. Dustin, I just want to say he did fantastic. And I think you guys need to make sure you tell him, because he can preach a little more often now. So make sure he's told that. So again, many people have set out to write accounts of the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used eyewitness accounts. See, right here we see Luke gives us an accurate account. Luke was a man of God who was meticulous in his writing. In this, and I had to learn a lot of this through Greek. I am not good in biblical languages, okay? I failed the Hebrew alphabet twice. Don't ask me about Hebrew. Greek, I failed the class once. I passed it the next time, and I liked it. And I started learning and studying more. I'm telling you this because I'm not the smartest guy up here. Good, I'm glad you got that. So when we were studying the Greek of this, we found out I was taught that the writings of Luke are the most detailed, the most complex writing. He uses articulate and high-structured sentences. Mark, and Jesus went here. Luke, and then Jesus got up and he moved, and he uses he's a doctor. He's used to details. The general vocabulary dictation shows that he's a very educated person. Luke spent a great deal to make sure it was accurate. He wanted to make sure we knew without a doubt that he knew what he was talking about. Secondly, we see Luke gives us an orderly account. Now, I want to say it is not strictly chronological. That was not important in that time period. They didn't care if it was chronological like we do today. But he does show the fullest progression of events in Christ's life compared to the other Gospels. And again, I said Luke wrote the book of Acts, which is also the Acts of Apostles, the Acts of Jesus Christ here. He's trying to show the exact things an orderly account so that when you walk away, you know that Jesus' birth was like, what his life was like, his ministry, his death, and his resurrection. He does it in an orderly way. Verse 3, having carefully identified or investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus. See, what we see here is Luke gives a dedicated account. He is not just writing. There is a purpose. He is writing this. Who is Theophilus? There's a lot of debate on that. In the Greek, it means one who is loved by God. So in a sense, we're all Theophilus. We're all that. So some people think it's written to a group of people because it's just Theophilus. But the way it's written in Greek, he says most excellent, the way the Greek is, most excellent Theophilus. That means you, the most excellent one who is loved by God. That doesn't fit with anything else Luke writes as to a group. So most likely, because in Greek times, that would have been used to describe a Roman official. So Theophilus is most likely a Roman official that Luke is saying, hey, let me tell you about this whole background of the Messiah. Everything so that you can go from skeptic to authentic believer. So anytime you see most excellent, he's referring to a Roman official, high-ranking person. So Luke begins and says, to you, Theophilus. I want to make sure that after you read the Acts of Jesus and then the Acts of the Apostles, that you are no longer doubting. You are no longer skeptic. I want this dedicated to you so you can walk away saying, that's it. Now I can hang my hat on that. Now I can stand and say this is true. And then verse 4, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Finally, we see Luke gives an authoritative account. There is power, authority in this. The word certain, is it still? So you can be certain. That word can be translated as exact. Can you go back one? Or two? There we go. So you can be certain, so you can be exactly sure is what that can be. How many of you are 100% sure on everything in your life? Luke is saying after you read this, you can check mark, I'm exactly 100% sure of this. He wants to make it clear. And I see some of you getting glassy-eyed now, like, okay, you've repeated a lot of things. You've said it a lot. All this is great, but how does it affect me? You're talking about Theophilus, some guy that I don't know. You're saying all this stuff that is great, but whatever. How many of you want a dynamic faith? A authentic faith that when people see you, they go, man, that guy, that gal, they're on fire. There is something real that they don't question if you're a Christian. That they know you are a sold-out believer of Christ. How many of you want to live authentically for Him, to authentic and serve, to authentic in worship, to authentic in everything in your life? The reason this is so important is because studies have shown the majority of Christians, no matter what the news says, the majority of Christians believe in a God-type person. The number is astounding. Statistics have shown 98% of Americans believe in some sort of a God over everything. And yet the news is giving all this publicity to the 14 atheists out there. Okay? It's just showing you some of this fake stuff that's out there. It's funny to me that they're getting this. All the Times articles and the CNN, it's a very small club of people who do not believe in any sort of high power out there. But while there's 98% of Americans who believe in a God, they also, a high number of that percentage, say you cannot know absolute truth. You cannot know what's right or real. There's a parable. We went over it in junior high Sunday school class this morning. It's funny. We talked about how so many things that they're asking about actually are coming out in the sermon. These kids are ahead of us, okay, which is so cool. So there's a common parable to help show this. Parable of the elephant and the blind men. And so you have a few blind men, and none of them know what an elephant looks like. And the only way they can tell is by going up and experiencing it. And so the first blind man goes up and he feels the trunk and he says, well, the elephant, it's like a hose with 2 holes at the end. And the next one goes, no, it's like a big tree trunk. And he's feeling the leg. And the next one's going, no, it's like this big leathery wall. It's huge and massive. And then the fourth one goes, no, it's really thin with little hairs and it smells. And he's holding the tail. That's the parable. And the point of the parable that people say is, they're all right. All 4 of those perspectives are right, just a little skewed. You can't fully know what an elephant is in that. The problem I have with that is saying there is no absolute truth then. You can't know what an elephant is. The only reason that makes sense is if I'm back here with somebody who has good eyes, and I say, well, you're right, but you're wrong in this area. You're right, but you're wrong in this area. And nobody wants that. They don't want to say, well, I believe in God, but I just don't believe. And then somebody says, well, you're wrong in this. Don't tell me what to do. You're judging me. But if I'm standing back here and I have a bigger picture and I have more knowledge, I need to say that. The whole idea is, of that elephant parable, you can't know absolute truth and say absolutely there's only one way to heaven. I have problems with that. You know me. If I got a problem with it, I'm going to tell you. It's intellectually inconsistent. It uses smokes and mirrors to pretend it's more tolerant than anything else, when in fact it is more hateful towards anything that they disagree with. Okay? And how many of you have heard, out of this 90% of people in America that say they believe in God, all religions are the same. All religions are following a path to God. It doesn't matter what you believe. It's how you live, as long as you're sincere about it. Does that sound familiar? I mean, we see it on the media. We hear it from our neighbors. We sometimes even hear it in our homes. Those are religious statements. Those are dogmas, doctrines. They are theological statements about God. And one of the things they say is no one can know God in his fullness. All religions can lead to God. It doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you live it good. Those are absolute statements. If you say no one can know absolutely everything about God, you just made an absolute. If you say there are no absolute truths, you just made an absolute truth about there's no absolute truths. That's irony there. Okay? The controversy, the hypocrisy of this is Christians claim there is absolute truth. And again, some of you are going, where the heck is he going? I thought we were talking about Luke. How does this come back? I say all this because, first of all, many of you have been or maybe still are skeptics. Because of the world is saying something, and you're coming here and hearing something totally different. And I want you to know, when you leave here today, it is not the word of Donnie, it is the word of Luke, who God inspired, who went and researched everything. He went and studied it. He heard eyewitness accounts, and he said, here is the absolute truth of Jesus. You want to believe what Jesus said? I studied it. I checked it out. You want to know where he walked, how he healed, what he ministered? It's right here. This isn't the words of Donnie. This isn't the message of St. Joe. This is God himself saying, here is authentic. It is absolute truth. So if you're a skeptic, Luke is telling you, you're in the right place. Because I can show you. I can teach you. I can express to you. I'm glad you're here. But let me make another statement on that. Because I think there's a pervasive arrogance when this topic comes up among believers. So I want to say a statement that many times gets overshadowed when somebody says, I know the absolute truth. And that is, Christians are no better than non-Christians. I want to make sure you all hear me on that. I am not more moral. I am not a better person than anyone else on this planet. No Christian is a better person than somebody who is a non-believer. That's where this arrogance, well, I'm a Christian, I'm better, I have better morals. No, you don't have better morals. Jesus does. You're not a better person. Jesus is. Because you follow him, he places himself on you, and therefore he is the better person living in and through you, not you. See, if I start saying I have moral excellence, I just devalued the throne of Jesus and I put me up there. But the focus, according to Luke, is look at Jesus. Look at him. He is authentic. Because if it all mattered on how moral, how good the preacher was, every church would fall and close. Because it's not about us. We are no better than any other person on this planet. Christians are not better people. They are not more moral. Okay? Can I emphasize that anymore? Christians do not save people. Jesus does. In the end, if religion had a motto, it would say, I obey, therefore I'm accepted. That's it. Whatever belief system you want, morality, religion says, because I do these good things, I am good enough. Christianity, through Jesus, says, no, you love the Muslim, your enemy. You serve him. You die for him, if need be. You love the Jew. You serve the Jew, and if necessary, you die for him. You love the Hindu. You serve him. You give up your food. You open your home for him. And if have to, you die for him. Jesus says, don't just obey me. Go out there and live as me. Let them see me in you. Love your enemies, not just your friends. I mean, it's easy to love your friends. But show them that you don't look at people, that you look at God by how you live. So this is the book of Luke. This is why I got excited and wanted to make sure you knew the whole foundation of why Luke was written, what he was trying to do. This is Luke. He says, let me introduce you to Jesus because I know you've been doing the religious thing all your life. You've been going through the motions. You go to the temple or you go to the church. You do this. You sit in the exact same pew. You got all assigned seats. I know it. Somehow you must have written your name on the fabric. And so many times we go through the motions. You've been making sacrifices to this person. You've been living it this way. You've been going to this. You've been saying this. Luke says, let me tell you about Jesus. Let me tell you about his teachings. Because it's different. It's I can't say the word. Drastically different. I wrote it. I can't read it. What's that word? Intrinsic. That's what I just said. Different at every single level. And because his work, because of his word, because of his life is so drastically different, it is so life-changing, I want to spell this out for you so that after you read it, you have to choose. I either trust it or walk away. Because after we go through the book of Luke, you cannot say, well, I didn't know. After we read through and study the book of Luke, you come across this, you will have to come up to that crossroad and say, I am all in or I'm all out. Because that's all that's left. Luke says, I'm going to put together a thorough work for you from beginnings, from everything I've read, from the people I studied, from the eyewitnesses' accounts. They were there 30 years ago, and I heard exactly what they said. I've tested it, I've researched it, I pick it apart, and eventually I'll let my life be taken for it. So this is the book of Luke, and it's going to be fun. And I hope you're ready for it. Because this authentic life, this world is screaming out for authenticity. The world does not just want people who look pretty and go to church. The world does not want people who just act nice who go to church. The world is saying, I want to know if Jesus makes a difference in your life. And if it does, you will do things differently. And that's what this church is ready to do. We are ready to become authentic so that the people don't have to question if we believe in God. it'll just already be known. And then we could say, let me tell you more because I've researched it. I've studied it. I've read the eyewitnesses' accounts, and this is why my life is different. Do you want to join? Do you want to be a disciple? Because I am. That's what Luke's about. That's our direction for this year. And I hope you're ready to jump in. If you've never given your life to Christ, if you've never said, okay, I'm in, don't wait. Last Sunday, we had an elder in the back. And I want to know what we might start doing this even more. Of having somebody ready that if you want to go talk to them, if you want to ask those questions, you don't have to do it up front. You can go to them and say, hey, I need help with this. Because we're a church that's going to be real, authentic disciples, and that means talking and sharing and uplifting with one another. So we're going to have that. If you want to be a part of this body of believers and say, you know what, if they accept you, I'm all in. If God can work through you in these ways, I'm all in. Let's serve and work together for His glory. If you need to make that, will you do that? Let's stand and let's sing an authentic song to our great and wonderful God.